G'day everybody, welcome to part 4 of the Speed Passion LM1 build series. Part 4, what we will be doing is we'll be continuing with the axle assembly, and what that will consist of is building the ball differential and adding the hex drive systems on it. Now this is going to be pretty straightforward. When you're building it, as I will say throughout the series, take your time with certain things and read the instruction manual too when you're doing it. It'll help. When I say read it, obviously you're going to read it, but what I mean is just take note and maybe just ponder over certain things that you're doing, and don't just rush into it straight away and says, okay, it says put this there, blah blah blah. Have a good look at it and see if there is a sequence in doing it, because while you might have to do a certain section, you might find that it's actually done in a certain sequence, and you might go ahead of yourself and foul things up. So yeah, that's just a little food for thought. Anyway, so what we will do is we'll do the left hand side of the axle, and we have a little spacer here. Put that on. Now we have the left hex drive, and you'll see too on the axle on the left hand side that it has on two sides it has a flat edge, and this will help with your grub screw or set screw, whatever you might call it. So what we need is our set screw and our 1.5mm hex driver, and we will need a little thread lock. Okay. Alright, of course that was going to fall out. Alright, nip it tight and it's in. So that, just be wary to make sure there's no play, but it also moves freely, because you don't want it to be binding on anything. Okay, so now what that's done, what we'll do now is we will start with the ball diff assembly. Okay, so what we have here is our two ball diff plates. We will also need our ball diff grease. This is included in the kit, same as some ordinary grease and some silicone shock oil, but we won't be using the grease or shock oil at this point in time. Okay, so what we will do is, you don't have to have any fancy tools for applying this, but what I will use is my small Allen driver, and what we will do is get some grease and just smear it around the edge. Doesn't have to be an even layer. You don't want to go nuts with it though, but you don't want to hold back in applying it. The reason being is this is going to be obviously lubricating the diff balls. Okay, so just apply it around. Okay, and also a little tip, just put a little bit on the back. So what that'll do is that will help it stick to the plate that it has to stick on. Now you will notice too with the ball diff plates that the inner circle is not actual circle, it's more like a it's got two straight sides, and that helps it sit on the mount. So now we'll put that there. We'll do the same thing. What we'll do, get some of the grease, put it around. These are certain things that you want to take good note of with what you're doing, because I've seen people rush in a diff rebuild, and what's happened is they've gone ahead and done it, and they've skimped on certain things, and there's a bit of damage on the ball diff. Now, admittedly, with the grease, what's going to happen after a period of time is that there's going to be a bit of dirt, especially with this kind of ball diff setup. It's going to be exposed to a lot of dirt, especially if you're on a dusty track. And so yeah, you want to pay close attention to what you're doing. So again, more grease will be needed. And what we'll be doing is we'll be putting on the outer holes of the spur gear. So just put it around. You only have to do it on one side, because what will be happening is the grease on the outside over the holes will just help the diff balls slide in. Got to loop your balls up. Okay, so now that that's done, now the fun begins. And why I say the fun begins is because you have all these little balls here, and you do not want to drop one. So what I will do is I'll just tip that out there. It's nothing necessary. I'll stick them in there. You're bound to have a couple left over. They usually put a couple extra in as a spare. So now we put them in. Just press it in. Not only does the grease lube it, but it also helps it stick and stay inside the actual spur gear. They reckon nitro cars are messy, but honestly, building an electric chassis is just as messy as well with all the grease. Yeah, I'm probably not going to actually end up with any spare balls, and you can make so many puns out of this. Okay. Yeah, I've got a pun. I've got 2 balls left. Alrighty. Okay, so that's this part done. So now what we'll be doing is we'll be placing the spur gear onto the shaft. And you'll find that the balls will start to push out a little bit because of the plate pushing on them. Don't worry about that. The grease will hold it in. Okay, now, next part, what we will need, where did I put it? Oh my goodness, where did I put it? Oh, my bad. Okay, we have 2 spring washers. What they are, they're like countersunk or cone shaped. When you put them, when we get to this part, you want the cone shape to facing each other, so when you tighten the ball diff, they'll spread out like that and want to push. This is what will set your diff. Alright, so now we've done that, we'll need a bearing. Go on. Like so. Okay. Now, next part, what we'll need is another bearing, which will go in. Take your time pushing it in. Okay, so now that will go onto the motor shaft, or onto the drive shaft to be precise. Okay, so that's how it's going to go on, like that. Yeah, the next part is we have two cone-shaped washers. What I'll do is I'll have to tip it on its side. Okay, next one goes in. When you put it in, you want it to be fairly even. It doesn't really matter if they're not. It doesn't look right. One more washer goes on. Now we have a nylock nut. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Oh, butterfingers. Okay, now this is where the fun bit comes. So now we have to tighten it. Don't do it too tight at first, because I'll get to it later, but we'll have to run the diff in. So at this point, just do it fairly tight. And it should go like that. Okay, now the next part, this is where it gets a little interesting. So now we need another set screw, and we will also need a pin, a drive pin. Okay, now what we need to do first is we'll need our 1.5mm driver with the set screw, little thread lock. Also, when it comes to the thread lock, I know some people say, oh, it doesn't really matter, but I try to use a hobby grade thread lock. People say, oh, there's no difference. But I mean, if you use Loctite, I mean, unless you're the Incredible Hulk, I mean, you'll never get the screw undone, and you'll end up stuffing up the screw heads and so forth. Okay, so when you put it in, make sure that the set screw is flush with the top of this. This is what holds the wheel nut on. So make sure it's flush with that. Okay, now when we put it through, there's only one way it can go in. So okay, it seems that I have to screw it in a little bit further. There we go. Okay, now we have, where'd the little pin go? Unbelievable. Oh, there it is. This is what happens when you have a black towel. Okay, so we push the pin in. And we tie it all the way down. Screw it rather. And there it is, folks. So that's the rear axle assembly done. Pretty straightforward. So as you can see, the spur gear, 2 plates on the side are a diff, so I'm able to go like so. So yeah, that's our diff assembly. So when you need to, if for instance you need to adjust your diff, you have to actually undo or loosen set screw, take the pin out, take this little part out, and adjust the nylock nut to adjust the diff tension. So that's the end of part 4. So part 5, what we will be doing is starting with the steering. Stay tuned.